All right, today I'll be talking about Chapter 5, which is on the American Revolution and the Articles of Confederation, 1774 to 1783. There are going to be a couple of video clips that I'm going to try to show in this. Fingers crossed it works. If it doesn't work, just skip ahead. You won't be able to see Hamilton, but we'll do our best. All right, so again, talking about the American Revolution today, first, we need to remember all of those events in the road to revolution. Now, there were a lot of them last week. You do not have to know all of them, but you should know a few of them. So between the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Boston Massacre, etc. And then the big one is the Intolerable Acts. Well, not the big one, but the last one. The Intolerable Acts basically forbid smuggling, and it basically controlled some of the colonial legislatures. So this was the last straw on the camel's back, if you will, the last thing that angered the colonists to demand self-representation or self-government. And then remember, with the Sugar, the Stamp Act, and all of the other ones, the big phrase there was no taxation without representation. All right. As the American Revolution begins, or rather as the colonists begin to demand some more rights, we're going to see two Continental Congresses. So the first Continental Congress, 1774, second Continental Congress in 1775. Each time the people are demanding a little bit more, doing a little bit more. So the first, 1774, delegates from 12 out of the 13 colonies, everyone except for Georgia. And there was some division there. You can see there was a more radical faction, Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, John Adams, some of our founding fathers, demanding basically total independence, sever the ties completely. More moderates who were trying to avoid war, perhaps. Some conservatives who didn't want to go quite as far. And then even some loyalists who were loyal to the British Crown. So even though the colonists are meeting at this Continental Congress, they are not necessarily united for the same thing. But they do agree on a few things. They agree to get rid of the Intolerable Acts, or to repeal the Intolerable Acts. They agree to a boycott of British goods, because the Intolerable Acts was all about trying to force the colonists to trade with the British, among other things. They write a Declaration of the Rights and Grievances, which basically says, okay, Parliament, sure, you have the power to regulate trade, but you need to listen to our concerns. So it was a list of complaints. They created a continental association to try to enforce this. And they said, if you don't do all of these things, if you don't recognize our rights basically to trade, we're going to meet again next year. King George III said, cool, I don't really care. I'm going to basically send more troops because you are an outright rebellion of me. So when we're talking about some of these key events, the First Continental Congress, 1774, there's 12 of 13 colonies there, and they do a few things. They repeal the Intolerable Acts, they boycott British goods, and this is kind of their first threat, I suppose, to the British. But they're not saying they want independence. They're not even saying that they want to rule themselves, just that Parliament needs to listen to their concerns. Relatively speaking, actually a somewhat moderate document. But again, the British said, cool, I don't really care. You're still in rebellion. So they sent troops. So 1775, the official fighting of the American Revolution begins. Lexington and Concord were two early battles. Bunker Hill was one of the big famous battles. And you can see there the casualties were, by today's standards, quite low. Like, these were relatively deadly battles and only hundreds of casualties. But it's because they're fighting with muskets. The British in one line, the Americans in one line. They fire, they go in a line, they aim their muskets, they fire, they reload by manually pumping in the gunpowder and the bullets, they fire again. So very, very slow fighting because they don't have the advanced technology that we have today. And it's, by 75, it's unclear who has the advantage. It seems like maybe the British have the advantage. I'm going to see if I can play this short video, but I need to reset how I do this. All right, let's see if this works.
The colonial soldiers are about to meet their first test. In a field outside Lexington, 77 militiamen have gathered to block the redcoat advance towards Concord. John Parker, leader of the Minutemen, knows the British outnumber his forces 10-1. He doesn't expect to defeat them. He just wants to send a message. We're here, we have guns, and we're going to resist. Major John Pitcairn, who commands the British troops, doesn't want to fight in Lexington. Running behind schedule, his goal is to secure a bridge farther west in Concord, but Pitcairn is forced to respond to the Minutemen's blockade.
Lay down your arms. Hold! Do not fire!
Neither side wanted a war to start, and so they stand there sort of face to face for a while.
Hundreds of professional soldiers confront dozens of militiamen armed with squirrel rifles and buckshot. Both Parker and Pitcairn issue orders not to shoot.
And somebody fired. And to this day, nobody knows exactly who fired. Was it a British soldier? Was it an American soldier? Was it a bystander? Who knows?
The shot triggers a hail of British bullets. The militiamen are overwhelmed and quickly retreat, some racing into the nearby woods. In 15 minutes, the Redcoats have routed the colonists. When the smoke clears, 8 Patriots lay dead, and the British soldiers continue on their way to Concord. The Battle of Lexington seems to confirm the worst, that Americans have no appetite for battle.
So this early battle, the Battle of Lexington, again, one of the kind of mythologies of the American Revolution is we don't actually know who fired the first shot. But first shot was fired. The British won the first battle in relatively easily, and that kind of portended doom or foreshadowed some challenges for the colonists. Okay. As the fighting begins, as promised, the colonists meet one more time in the Second Continental Congress, 1775. So while Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill, while those first battles are happening, the politicians are also meeting in Philadelphia this time. And again, there's some disagreement. The New Englanders mostly want independence, while the middle colonies, they're willing more to negotiate with the British. And we're going to see these divisions between more the Patriots and the Loyalists throughout the American Revolution. Second Continental Congress does a few things, and I'll add these to our notes. So again, I'll clarify that there is division. Is there independence, or do they want to have just negotiation? Some of the things that they do is they create an American Army and Navy led by General George Washington. There are some initial raids into Quebec by Benedict Arnold, who famously betrayed the American colonists and was actually secretly supporting the British. And then there are some efforts to peace. There's the olive branch petition. If you know your Greek mythology, if you offer an olive branch to someone, it's basically a peace offering. And so they ask the king to mediate. They're trying to create peace. But Parliament responds and basically says, no, you all are openly in rebellion. They ban all trade between British and the colonies, basically trying to starve them out. So Parliament responds with a it's not a boycott, with a ban on trade and basically war, I suppose. So it seems very clear that things are headed for even more battle, even more conflict after those first battles. So again, you have the military battles, Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill. You have the politicians meeting, trying to negotiate, trying to figure out if they want independence or not. And at the exact same time, you also have the politicians and the philosophers writing essays and writing their new ideas down. So the two big documents that you absolutely have to know, and we're going to read excerpts from both of these, is Common Sense by Thomas Paine. If you know your Hamilton, I've been reading Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Some think that I'm intense or I'm insane. You want to, okay, I'm going to stop that. And hopefully the 9 of you that are actually watching this video enjoyed that. Thomas Paine writes Common Sense in 1776. It basically says that lawful states derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Hopefully that sounds familiar. That's Jean-Jacques Rousseau's idea. That's the social contract. Governments get their power from the people. And he says a huge country like America should not be ruled by a tiny country like England. It's only common sense. It's only common sense that power flows from the people, not from the monarch. So he's trying to make a logical argument for independence. Declaration of Independence in the same year, July 4th, 1776, written mostly by Thomas Jefferson, is a list of grievances. It's a list of complaints. England is doing this, and this. It begins in the preamble, when in the course of human events, people are compelled to act, are compelled to take action. And then it says that people are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's a list of those natural rights. And so when we have these new ideas, you have Common Sense by Thomas Paine. And then you have the Declaration of Independence, mostly by Jefferson, although others contributed to it. Common Sense by Thomas Paine is mostly about popular sovereignty, which basically means the power comes from the people. And it justifies or rationalizes American independence. Declaration of Independence is a list of grievances. It's a list of complaints. And it is a formal separation from the British. Beyond that, it's a list of natural rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It also gives people the right to rebel. If the government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. And so it basically says, you know what, we are actively in rebellion because we are actively going to be our own country. We are an independent country now. Now, again, not all people were on the same page. There was clear division between even the colonists. And the two main sides were the Loyalists, or the Tories, and the Patriots. So let me do a quick table here so we can get both of these ideas in. Again, definitely words that you need to be familiar with. Loyalists were about 20 to 30% of the colonists, mostly from, so New York, New Jersey, Georgia, that's mostly the middle colonies, plus Georgia, Georgia. And they're wealthier, they're more conservative because, well, if they're wealthy, they're benefiting from the system. They're benefiting from the trade with England. Patriots, 40%, mostly New England and Virginia. A lot of our founding fathers came from Virginia, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and others. And the Patriots actually offered freedom to any African-American who would join their army. About 5,000 former enslaved Africans gained their independence by fighting with the Patriots. Now, as the war began, there were very clear strengths and weaknesses for each side. Let me actually add to this. So, okay, we have the Loyalists or Tories who are supporting the British, and then the colonists who are supporting America, obviously. Oh, whoopsies. And so when we're talking about pros of the British, they have the numerical advantage. They have more people. They are wealthier. They're able to hire basically mercenaries, the Hessians, and they have the strongest navy in the world. And so on paper, it seems like the British have the clear advantage. But the weakness is, well, communication is challenging across the Atlantic. It's incredibly hard to communicate military strategy. There's no clear target for them to attack because there is no major urban center like you'd have a London in England or a Paris in France. There's a lot of just smaller towns scattered throughout. And they have other enemies to deal with, especially France. France is actually going to ally with the colonists. The colonial strengths and weaknesses, on the other hand, sorry, trying to get this set up for us. The pros, they have the leaders. I mean, all of those famous great Americans that we have statues of, either rightly or not. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Marquis de Lafayette, who was a Frenchman who came to help us. So excellent leadership. They also had a self-sustaining agriculture, which means they didn't have to trade with anyone. They had all the food that they would need to keep on fighting. They also had home court advantage, if you will. They're fighting on home soil, so that allows them to get resources, to get housing. They know the soil, they know the advantages. They believed in a just cause. Now, I don't know how much that actually motivated them, depends on what you believe in, but perhaps that was a motivation to get them to fight more. And then they also had support from France. France hated England, and so France helped the colonists as a way to get back at their enemy, England. So they have great leaders, they have support from France, and they have kind of a home court advantage, especially food supply and things like that. The big cons, though, they were incredibly poorly organized. There was no clear unity. I mean, we saw even up here, there's a pretty big chunk of colonists who do not support the cause. They also had a lack of money. They had no clear way to raise funds because, remember, Parliament in England controls the taxes, so they can't really raise money. If they can't raise money, it's going to be hard for them to raise an army or train an army. And then they had no real power. And so this is really a ragtag group of colonists who are scratching and clawing against the much bigger British army. But again, they're fighting on home soil, which gives them a huge advantage. Okay, let's see if we can get a quick scene from Hamilton. I got to change my sharing settings. And then let's see if this will work.
The Battle of Yorktown, 1781.
Monsieur Hamilton!
Monsieur Lafayette!
In command where you belong!
Are you saying no sweat? We're finally on the field. We've had quite a run.
Immigrants, we
get the job done. So what are we doing?
I go back to France. I bring freedom to my people if I'm given the chance.
We'll be with you when you do.
Go, lead your men.
See you on the other side.
Here we meet again.
I am not going away, Marcia. I am not going away, Marcia. Hey, you want just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not going away, Marcia. I am not going away, Marcia.
Till the world turns upside down.
Till the world turns upside down.
I imagine death so much it feels more like a memory. This is where it gets me. On my feet, the enemy ahead of me. If this is the end of me, at least I have a friend with me. Weapon in my hand, a command of my men with me. Then I remember my Eliza's expecting me. Not only that, my Eliza's expecting. We gotta go, gotta get the job done. Gotta start a new nation, gotta meet my son. Take the bullets out your gun, take the bullets out your gun. Move undercover when we move as one. Through the night we have one shot to live another day. We cannot let a stray gunshot give us away. We will fight up close, seize the moment and stay in it. It's either that or meet the business end of a bayonet. Onwards, Rochambeau, dig me. You have your orders now, go man, go. So the American experiment begins. Our friends all scattered. scattered to the winds. Lawrence is in South Carolina, redefining bravery. We'll never be free until we end slavery. When we finally drop the British away, Lafayette is there waiting in Chesapeake Bay. How did we know that this plan would work? We had a spy on the inside, that's right.
I spied on the British government. I take the measurements, information, and then I smuggle it to my brother's revolutionary covenant. I'm running with the sons of liberty, and I am loving. So that's what happens when you up against the ruffians. We in the Chanel, somebody's gotta shuffle it. Hercules Mulligan, I need no introduction. When you knock me down, I get the shoot back up.
Fighting, a young man in a red coat stands on a parapet.
We lower our guns as he frantically waves that white handkerchief.
And just like that, it's over. We tend to our wounded, we count our dead.
Black and white soldiers wonder alike if this really means freedom.
Not yet.
We negotiate the terms of surrender. I see George Washington smile. We escort the men out of Yorktown. They stagger home single file. Tens of thousands of people flood the streets. There are screams and church bells ringing. And as a fallen foes retreat, I hear the drinking song they're singing. The world turned upside down. 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 Down, 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 down. Freedom for America, freedom for France. Down, down. This time, this gotta be my son. Down, down. We won. We won. We won. We won. The world turned upside down.
So hopefully you got a little bit of chills after watching that one. We'll try to keep on watching some more clips as we continue through the story. All right. So, whoops. The Battle of Yorktown. That was kind of the last battle that allowed the British colonists to finally win. Now that alliance with France helped them quite a bit. But ultimately after the Battle of Yorktown, the colonists win. And with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, there are a lot of Treaty of Parises. Sorry, it's a big city in Europe, so a lot of treaties get signed there. The US is recognized as an independent nation. Britain is forced to recognize us, and it sets the boundary as the Mississippi River. That's going to keep on being expanded as there are more and more wars of conquest from the Americans, but for now, at least, Americans would also have fishing rights off the coast of Canada, but they did say, okay, there was some conflict, there were some people in the Americas who didn't support this, so Americans, you got to pay the debts owed to the British merchants for all of the goods that you destroyed, and you've got to help those loyalists out because a lot of the loyalists would have property confiscated from them during the war because they were the enemy. Well, not quote, they were the enemy, and so they have to kind of pay reparations. So the U.S. is recognized as an independent nation. It sets boundaries. It sets fishing rights and stuff like that. And then there are some reparations that they have to pay to set things right. We already watched that, and that link doesn't work either. Cool. Now, immediately after independence, the Constitution is not written immediately. So it's going to take about a decade or so until the U.S. Constitution is written. But each state is going to be creating their own. By 1777, most of those former colonies, now states, 10 of those 13 states had written constitutions, which tried to have a balance between enlightened ideas, individual liberties, rights, freedoms, and more conservative ideas, law and order, if you will, keeping people in check. Some constitutions were more liberal, more enlightened than others, but all of them had a list of rights. All of them had a separation of powers. You might remember that was Baron de Montesquieu's idea. All of them had some form of voting, normally just for white male property owners. And all of them had some form of office holding, which means government officials that you could run for, again, if you were a white male property owner. 10 out of 13 states create their own constitutions. And again, when you think of the Enlightenment, there are natural rights, there's separation of powers, there is some form of voting, some form of popular sovereignty. The big first constitution that the US writes is what's called the Articles of Confederation. Written in 1777, fully drafted, or fully ratified rather, in 1781. But it was kind of a failure. And so Articles of Confederation was a unicameral legislature. Una means one, so there's only one house. There's just a Congress. Whereas today, in the US, with the Constitution, we have a bicameral legislature, Senate and House of Reps, 2 houses. So unicameral legislature, each state gets 1 representative, so only 13 representatives, which you can imagine might have created some conflict in terms of who gets those powers. And they also had some pretty strict requirements on how to pass the laws. You needed 9 out of 13 states to pass a law. Even today, you have majority wins, or sometimes supermajority, 60%. But back then, 9 out of 13 to pass laws. And you needed all 13 to pass an amendment. Today, you need, I believe, 75% of states to write an amendment. So the kind of requirements to actually do anything were quite challenging. So I'm going to put here the Articles of Confederation, 1781, and I'm going to list the strengths and weaknesses here. Articles of Confederation doesn't last for very long. When it's tested, it's almost always about its weaknesses. We'll go over some of its strengths as well. So, I mean, in terms of strengths, Congress could declare war, which it wasn't necessarily able to do during much of the American Revolution. They could also do diplomacy. They could sign treaties and things like that. And they could borrow money. And that's kind of it. What Congress could not do, Congress could not raise taxes or collect taxes at all. So you can imagine that would be incredibly challenging. How are you going to fund anything without that? They also could not actually enforce any laws. If you can't enforce laws, what's going to make people actually follow it? So the Articles of Confederation didn't really give the US government any real power. Not only that, it was incredibly hard to actually pass laws or amendments because of that 9 out of 13 requirement or unanimous to do an amendment. So the Articles of Confederation was the first attempt by the United States of America to create a functional government, but it doesn't last for very long because pretty quickly the Americans realized its weaknesses and write a bigger and better constitution. So we are going to wrap up. So just so we can see all of our notes there, pause here if you need to. And then on the bottom half, pause there if you need to. We didn't focus, or rather I didn't focus too much on the military battles. Talked about Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, Yorktown a little bit. I'm focusing mostly on what's going on politically, which we have here. All right. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully more than 9 of you watched this time, but if not, whatever, it's fine. I don't care.